I loved him quietly. Through every season, every city I moved to, every birthday spent alone. I never told him. Not in high school. Not in college. Not even when I saw him with someone else. And now, 48 years later, we sat across from each other once more. He looked at me, blinked, and whispered, "I always wondered where you went." This isn't a story about regret. It's about a love that stayed. Even when everything else changed. Pushpin if you're new here, subscribe. Every story I tell is someone's truth, just like this one. My name is Eliza, and the first time I saw Thomas Everly was on a Wednesday afternoon in May 1976. I remember it so clearly because the sun was too bright, my hands were too sweaty, and I had just been assigned to shelf duty at the town's public library, my first ever volunteer assignment. Back then, I was 17. Shy. Always second-guessing myself. I wasn't unpopular, but I wasn't the kind of girl who turned heads either. I was the girl who read too many books, wrote poems she never showed anyone, and secretly wondered what it felt like to be someone's favorite person. And then Thomas walked in. He was tall. Not in a lanky way, in a way that made you feel like he'd always been grown. Dark blonde hair. Soft eyes. That kind of posture that said, "I don't try to be cool. I just am." He wore a denim jacket with worn patches on the elbow, and he smiled at the librarian like he knew her. Like they were old friends. They probably were. "Eliza, meet Thomas," said Mrs. Keller. "He's been volunteering here since he was 14. He'll show you around." He turned to me. Held out a hand. "You're new," he said with a half smile. "You'll like it here. Quiet corners, secret snacks in the back office, and the smell of old pages." That was the first time I blushed so hard I dropped my clipboard. We spent that summer shelving books, cataloging returns, and sneaking glances between the poetry and mystery aisles. He never made me feel small. He asked about my favorite authors. He listened when I rambled about Sylvia Plath and E. Cummings. One day, he caught me humming quietly while shelving. "You sing when you're nervous," he said. "It's nice." I wanted to tell him everything, that I thought about him even when I wasn't at the library, that my heart beat faster every time he leaned a little too close. But I didn't. Because Thomas? He was the kind of boy other girls noticed too. And I didn't want to ruin what we had by dreaming too loud. In late July, the library hosted a summer fundraiser, a little garden event with lemonade, ribbon lights, and old records playing. Mrs. Keller forced me to wear a pastel yellow dress. I hated it until Thomas walked in, did a double take, and said, "You look like a sunflower." My heart almost burst. We danced once. Just once. Slow, swaying, barely touching. I rested my head on his shoulder. He whispered, "I'm leaving next week. Columbia. Full ride." I knew it. I'd heard others mention it. But hearing it from him made it real. "That's amazing," I said, forcing a smile. "I'll miss this place," he said. Then paused. I'll miss you. I looked up at him. Will you write? I asked. He hesitated, then nodded. Yeah. I'll write. But he never did. Not once. I waited. Weeks turned to months. I wrote a dozen letters, all torn and trashed before they ever saw a stamp. Then, in January, someone told me he was dating someone at Columbia. My heart didn't break. It just folded. Quietly. Neatly. Like the pages of a love letter no one would ever read. I didn't hear from Thomas after that summer. No calls. No letters. Just silence. At first, I told myself he must be busy. College life. New city. New people. Maybe my address got lost, or he didn't know what to say. But as the months passed, I stopped checking the mailbox like I used to. Still, I thought about him. Every time I passed the library. Every time I opened a book he once touched. Every time someone asked if I was seeing anyone. Years moved faster than I expected. I went to community college. Got a degree in social work. Moved to Portland for my first job, helping foster kids transition out of group homes. It was hard work. Emotional. Heavy. But it grounded me. In quiet moments, I'd wonder where Thomas was. If he still liked poetry. If he still tilted his head when he listened deeply. One afternoon in 1987, 11 years after our last dance, I saw him. Not in person. In a newspaper. Young Entrepreneur of the Year, Thomas Everly opens second publishing house in Boston. There was a photo. Older. Clean-shaven. Still handsome. And beside him, a woman. Smiling. Holding his hand. Wife. I stared at that image for hours. Then quietly clipped it and folded it into the back of an old book, the same one he'd once said smelled like rain. Friends asked why I never settled down. I guess I'm just waiting for something that feels right, I'd say. No one ever guessed the truth. That I'd already felt it, once, and never again. I dated a few men. Some were kind. Some weren't. But none of them made my heart stutter. None of them made me forget to breathe. I never told anyone about Thomas. He became my secret museum, rooms I visited alone. By 1999, I had moved again, this time to Seattle. My hair was shorter. My job more demanding. My nights quieter. And then, one morning in a thrift bookstore, I heard his name. 2 women chatting near the counter. And then Thomas Everly spoke at the fundraiser. Still so charming. You'd never guess he went through a divorce last year. Divorce? My heart skipped. I didn't say anything. Didn't follow them. Didn't even look up. But that night, I dug out the old clipping again. And for the first time in decades, I let myself whisper his name aloud. Thomas. It still felt like music. Over the next 10 years, I focused on writing short essays, reflections, little anonymous pieces in small journals. I never used my real name. Until one day in 2009, I published a piece called The Man in the Poetry Aisle, a short, nostalgic memory of a boy in a library who never knew he was loved. It went mildly viral. Got picked up by a few literary blogs. And one day, an email landed in my inbox. Subject: I think I was the boy in that aisle. My hands trembled. From Thomas Everly. If your name is Eliza, and if that yellow dress had sunflowers on it, then I think we've both been remembering the same moment for 33 years. Would you meet me for coffee? I'm in Seattle this week. I didn't respond. Not yet. Because love waits. But fear waits, too. I stared at Thomas's email for nearly 3 hours. It was short, polite, careful. But underneath the neat punctuation and gentle phrasing, I felt something raw, like hope, tentative, nervous, and aching. Would you meet me for coffee? I'm in Seattle this week. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened a drawer I hadn't touched in years. Inside were 26 letters. All written to him. None ever sent. Some were short. Scribbled thoughts on napkins or in notebooks after long days at work. Others were pages long, confessions, dreams, what-ifs. One read. You looked at me like I was important. No one else ever did. Not like that. Another. I heard you got married. I hope she sees you the way I did, even if she gets to hold your hand, and I only get to remember it. And one that broke me. I hope you think of me when it rains. I sat on my bedroom floor, surrounded by decades of silence turned ink. I could have sent any one of those letters. Could have answered his message with just a yes. Could have gone to the cafe down the street and seen him again. But I didn't know how. Because what do you say to the man who unknowingly shaped your whole life, without ever knowing you were still watching him from afar? The next day, I drafted a reply. Subject: the boy in the aisle. Hi Thomas. I think I've written this email for 30 years without ever typing it. Yes, it was me. I was the girl in the yellow dress. The one who sang when she was nervous. The one who watched you leave and didn't stop you. I never stopped thinking about you. And if you meant what you wrote, I'll be at Red Oak Cafe on 5th Avenue. Tomorrow. 4 p.m. I'll bring the sunflowers. But instead of hitting send, I printed the message, folded it, and placed it with the letters. Then I dressed. Walked to the cafe. And waited. I watched every man who walked in. Wondered if I'd recognize him. Wondered if he'd recognize me. I ordered chamomile tea. Picked the corner seat. Set a tiny bouquet of sunflowers on the table. And then, 27 minutes past 4, he walked in. Older. Grayer. But it was him. He scanned the cafe. His eyes landed on the sunflowers. And he smiled. He walked over slowly. Nervous. As if this moment could break if we breathed too hard. Eliza, he said, like a question and a prayer. Hi, Thomas. He sat across from me. No words for a while. Just two people with hearts racing, hands trembling, and memories flooding. I always wondered if I imagined you, he whispered. That summer. That dance. You didn't. He looked down. I looked for you. A few years after school. Wrote to your old address, but the letters came back. I moved. Life happened. I married someone else, he said, voice low. But I never forgot you. Neither did I. We sat for over an hour. Talked about the past. The library. His career. My work. Our losses. Our regrets. He told me about his divorce. How he kept a book I once recommended. How he'd read that story online and cried. I knew it was you. I just knew. When we stood to leave, he reached for my hand. May I see you again? I nodded. You already are. We started meeting every Saturday. Always the same cafe. Always the same sunflowers between us. Sometimes we talked for hours. Sometimes we just sat. It felt like we were stitching together a quilt from old fabric, familiar, warm, and full of stories. Thomas asked questions. About my life. My work. My favorite authors. I answered all of them, except one. Why didn't you ever tell me how you felt? I paused. Because I thought loving you silently was better than losing you completely. He looked like he might cry. I would have chosen you. If I had known. But life isn't about what could have been. It's about what still can be. 6 months later, he invited me to a reading he was hosting at a local bookstore. He stood at the mic and introduced his piece. This is called The Girl in the Yellow Dress. It's about someone I lost. And someone I found again. The audience smiled politely. I didn't move. His voice shook. Just slightly. He told the whole story. How he met me. Lost me. Looked for me. And then, with a full room watching, he looked directly at me and said, sometimes, love doesn't fade. It just waits. Eliza, thank you for waiting. The entire place turned to me. And I cried. A year after that, we moved in together. Just a small cottage outside Seattle. A garden. Books stacked in every corner. We weren't trying to relive our youth. We were honoring it. People were surprised. Some whispered things like late bloomers or old flames. But we didn't care. Because every morning, he brought me coffee with a single sunflower in a jar. And every evening, we read poetry aloud, the same ones we used to shelve. On our first shared birthday, he gave me a box. Inside were 26 letters. You thought you wrote all the unsent ones, he said. But I kept mine too. I read them all. He had written to me in 1980. Again in 1984. After his divorce. Before his first book launch. Every letter ended the same. If you ever find this, I hope you still remember the yellow dress. I did. I always had. People say first love fades. That real life replaces it. That time wears it down. But they're wrong. Sometimes, first love waits. It lingers. Grows older. Softer. But never quieter. Thomas and I lived another 10 years together. He passed on a warm morning in April, holding my hand. A sunflower on the nightstand. He whispered, one last time. Still in love. And I smiled through the tears. Because I was too. Even after 48 years. Still in love.